There we go. So welcome again to today's webinar on developing state advanced nuclear energy strategic frameworks, guidance for state energy offices and public utility commissions. I did want to thank the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Nuclear Energy for supporting this activity today. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar will be recorded, as you just heard, and it will be shared on NARUC's and NASIO's YouTube pages and websites. We will be able to share the recording, slides, and the report itself with all registered attendees after today's event, so please look out for an email from us. After the presentation, we will have time for Q&A, so feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box at any time, and we will try to get to those at the end. Now I'm going to pass things over to our moderator for today's webinar, the Honorable Leah Marquez Peterson. She currently serves on the Arizona Corporation Commission and is the past chairwoman. During her tenure, she has fought hard for affordable utility rates and focused on ensuring energy reliability. She was appointed by the governor in 2019 and later won election to a 4-year term in 2020 and in 2024. She is the first Hispanic woman to serve in a statewide seat in the history of Arizona and is the only commissioner based outside of the Phoenix area. She has established a reputation on the commission as a knowledgeable commissioner who is known for her fairness to consumers and utilities. She's concerned with any vote at the commission that will impact the ratepayer, especially those who are vulnerable and may be facing financial challenges. And last but not least, I want to mention she is a co-chair of the NARUC-NASIO Advanced Nuclear State Collaborative. So we thank her for her engagement there, and I'll pass things over to her for some opening remarks.
Great. Thank you very much, Kira. And good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Leah Marquez Peterson from Arizona. Right now, many states are considering the value of advanced nuclear power and thinking about how state energy offices, public utility commissions, and other state agencies can navigate these opportunities and challenges. With this goal in mind, NASEO, which stands for National Association of State Energy Officials, and NARUC, our National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, work closely with the state energy offices and PUCs involved in the NARUC-NASEO Advanced Nuclear State Collaborative that Kira referenced. We work to develop a guidance document that can provide states with support in thinking about their coordination and approach to the road ahead. The goal of the final framework report is to serve as a resource and guidance document for states as they look at many projects that potentially could be moving forward and advance supportive policies, programs, and regulations to an advanced nuclear energy strategic framework. I know in my state of Arizona, we have had a lot of interest in expansion of nuclear. We have an exploratory docket that folks can follow and see what we're doing in Arizona. And I really encourage my fellow commissioners to read through this report and to see how it can be useful in their own state. With this in mind, I'm excited to welcome the report authors, Kira Zeidelman, who you met previously, who's a technical director at NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation. Kelsey Jones is on the call, the program director at the National Association of State Energy Officials, and Catherine Klein, the Senior Technical Advisor at NARUC Center for Partnership and Innovation. And I will turn it back to Kira. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. If we could go to the next slide, please. So just a little bit of background on NARUC and NASIO. As the commissioner mentioned, we are the nonprofit associations for the state public service commissions or public utility commissions in the case of NARUC, and for NASIO, the governor designated energy officials from all states and territories. And together we formed the Advanced Nuclear State Collaborative in 2023 with support from the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy. And the purpose of the ANSC is informational and to support peer sharing among states. Membership is open to anyone at a public utility commission or a state energy office. If you'd like to get more involved in the ANSC, please send one of us an email after this webinar and we'd be happy to connect with you. Next slide. So before we really get into the report, I wanted to talk about what we were thinking about when we came up with the concept here. So we noticed that throughout many states, there has been interest, particularly from the state policy side, in advanced nuclear due to its environmental reliability and economic development benefits, particularly as we've entered this last couple years of conversation around load growth, data centers, artificial intelligence, and electrification. So in many states, the policymakers have turned to the energy experts in their states, either their energy offices or public utility commissions, and requested that they develop strategic frameworks to look at the role of new nuclear generation, look at the factors that influence the success of nuclear projects, and identify action items for state agencies and for policymakers as well. So these documents, or the purpose of the document that NABERC and NASIO have prepared is to assist state energy offices and public utility commissions in developing these documents. A number of states have already done so. A number of states have them in progress. So we've tried to identify some of the lessons learned and provide an inventory of resources that are available to states that might be earlier in this process. We can go to the next slide. So we start the report just with some level setting. We have growing demand, lots of interest in new electricity generation across the country. Many states with clean energy goals or that are expecting economic development or want to increase energy security are looking at advanced nuclear as a way to support those objectives. The current U.S. nuclear fleet is our largest source of carbon-free electricity, operating at over 90% capacity and providing around 20% of U.S. electricity. We have a little bit of background on advanced reactors. I'll go relatively quickly so that we can get into the meat of our report, but we focus on Generation 3+ and Generation 4, where Gen 4 uses novel fuels and coolants, and Gen 3+ reactors would be reliant on conventional low-enriched uranium fuel and water as a coolant. We talk about the various sizes of microreactors, small modular reactors, and large gigawatt-scale reactors. We note, according to the Nuclear Innovation Alliance, there are 11 advanced nuclear developers with announced deployment dates between 2026 and 2031. And in 2024, according to the Nuclear Energy Institute, there were 25 states that passed pro-nuclear energy legislation, often expanding the definitions of clean energy to explicitly include nuclear, in some cases lifting moratoriums on the construction of new nuclear generation. So with all of that as background, we can go to the next slide. So what is a strategic framework? We first start to define this in our document. We view a strategic framework as distinct from documents like a feasibility study, a siting study, policy recommendations, or a technology primer. We see the strategic framework as being written for a really broad variety of audiences, policymakers, utilities, customers, other state agencies. It establishes a common set of shared objectives across the state, and looks at the role of each state agency in exercising its authority to meet those objectives. It can identify action items for various stakeholders. Some of these strategic frameworks have involved recommendations or reports to state legislatures, and recommendations for statutory changes that could help facilitate the deployment of new nuclear generation. It builds a common understanding of the opportunities and challenges surrounding nuclear. And another important factor is looking at socioeconomic factors, community engagement, and really taking a holistic view of, of new nuclear generation. Feasibility or a siting study would really be to recommend or discourage a particular investment, would be written for a decision maker that's just looking at one particular project. It could compare different sites and reactor designs for consistency with state objectives or risks and advantages, and tends to be more technical in nature with limited, if any, consideration of socioeconomic factors. Policy recommendations, of course, while those could be an output of a strategic framework, that would result in statutory language that would be up to state agencies to interpret and implement. And a technology primer, again, would be a more technical document that would summarize some of the currently and in the near future commercially available technologies to help decision makers select a optimal technology to support. Next slide, please. So why take the time to go about developing a strategic framework? Some of the questions that can be answered in these documents are around how can advanced nuclear generation help achieve state energy policy goals, whatever those goals may be. what action should be taken to improve the likelihood of advanced reactors being located in the state? How can a state facilitate a encouraging environment for nuclear investment? Um, Overcoming challenges, a strategic framework ideally would take a look at the risks and challenges to advanced nuclear development and recommend strategies for state agencies and stakeholders to overcome those barriers. And it would also prepare states to understand the full range of actions that are required to develop a nuclear project from conception all the way to construction and operation. And with the next slide, I will pass it over to my colleague Kelsey Jones at NASIO to talk about some of the existing state resources that we talk about in this document.
Thank you, Kira. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. While this strategic framework document primarily focuses on tools and resources for states interested in developing their own frameworks, we do focus heavily on existing examples. So I did want to walk through briefly 6 case studies that we highlight in the report. As you can see on the slide here, several of these states have completed a strategic framework. Many of these are similar reports that may not be a framework in exact model, but may highlight similar qualities or may even include recommendations for the state to develop a framework. So one of the very first that came out was led by the Wyoming Energy Authority in close coordination with state stakeholders and Idaho National Lab, and this was released in 2023 and established 3 primary objectives. The framework looked at how to accelerate a strategy in the state centered on 3 pillars, which are nuclear generation, supply chain, and value chain, and outline challenges related to federal permitting and regulation, technology development risks, uncertainty around supply chain, financing. And this was one of the first frameworks that came out from a state energy office and has been a good model for others that have come since. And the state has also emphasized that it was a good opportunity to send a market signal to the private sector that the state was interested in advanced nuclear and had begun some of the landscape assessment of policy and regulatory barriers and potential recommendations for the state. In Utah, the Office of Energy Development has been undertaking a strategic nuclear energy pathway. The first in the series was released about a year ago and identified steps to prepare the state for hosting a reactor. Some of the highlights in that piece were around developing an efficient regulatory framework for the state, updating the state's definition of nuclear energy, creating incentives for developers in the form of grants, tax credits, or loan guarantees. And then there was also an emphasis placed on the value of pursuing an early site permit in the state. In Louisiana, the Public Service Commission opened an exploratory docket to assess advanced nuclear development in 2023. And then last year, the Louisiana Advanced Nuclear Competitive Edge Strategic Framework was filed. And this framework, similar to the one in Wyoming, was developed in close coordination with key stakeholders in the state, as well as utilities, industries, representatives, Idaho National Lab, NEI, and others. And it also centered around those 3 pillars of generation, supply chain, and value chain, breaking down regulatory considerations, policy incentives, different use cases, and recommendations for the state within each of those pillars. And some of the next steps outlined in the report are around identifying and pursuing government incentives and programs for advanced nuclear, exploring potential regulatory cost recovery mechanisms, such as pre-approval of projects, formula rate making, and others. And then in Tennessee, the Nuclear Energy Advisory Council released its final report in November 2024, and it included 19 recommendations related to addressing first-of-a-kind costs for SMRs, growing a strong supply chain, and coordinating workforce development. And some of the recommendations outlined in the report included establishing a joint office of nuclear advancement in the state, growing the State Nuclear Energy Investment Fund, and establishing a nuclear energy workforce center. And then in Virginia, the Nuclear Energy Consortium Authority developed a strategic plan in 2020, which outlined 5 objectives, one of which was for the state to develop a framework or roadmap for new nuclear generation, explore public-private partnerships, invest in education and training, and consider a nuclear generation mandate. And then the last case study is also one of the most recent. It was released in 2025, a blueprint for considerations of advanced nuclear energy technologies, released by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And this blueprint outlined the scope of some of the most important questions associated with advanced nuclear and looked at technology readiness, environmental justice, waste, cost, financing, and other factors. And this blueprint is meant to be a starting point for a New York master plan for responsible advanced nuclear development. So as I mentioned, many other states, including Kentucky, Indiana, have released reports or studies on nuclear. So this is just a brief snapshot of some relevant documents that either follow the framework model or take a similar approach. But we hope you can check out the report and see those case studies in more detail. But we also wanted this to be a really actionable guidance document for state energy offices and public utility commissions. So we outline some of the initial steps and recommendations for developing a framework. We do see this as just one avenue for states to see how advanced nuclear can help support their state energy priorities and goals, and to get a better sense of the landscape for advanced nuclear. And so we also see the framework process as an opportunity to bring together different key stakeholders, and that state energy offices and PUCs are really well positioned to lead the development of these documents. So some of the initial considerations we highlight in the report are scoping potential questions to help inform the framework. So we encourage states to begin thinking about what is the objective of the framework, and is this document the best approach to meeting that objective? Which state entity will lead the development process? Will the framework be drafted in-house, or will a consultant be brought on board? What is the timeline? What funding is available? What data is needed? Will a working group or task force be established to support the framework? What stakeholders will be part of it? So just a bunch of comprehensive questions to start thinking about before the framework outline is pulled together. And then we recommend states identify and explore technical assistance opportunities and needs. We highlight available resources through DOE, the national labs, some of the trade associations, and highlight some examples of technical assistance that's been done for states, including policy or market assessments that help states better understand what policy changes may help accelerate opportunities for new nuclear. As I mentioned, when scoping out the initial questions, we do think there's a lot of value in establishing a working group or task force early in the framework process, for a few reasons, but also to ensure a diversity of perspectives are incorporated into the document. We emphasize an example from Kentucky, the Nuclear Development Work Group, which was made up of the Energy Office, Public Service Commission, utilities, universities, state legislature, nonprofits, and other experts. And they met several times to develop recommendations that were outlined in a final report. And then the last piece is around local engagement, which we see as critically important both before the framework is begun and throughout the process. We suggest bringing in community-based organizations or local governments to a working group or task force, or providing an opportunity for the public to give public comment. We walk through an example from Indiana where they held several focus groups to inform their statewide SMR study. They also did a survey to the public with questions on how do residents perceive land use siting for SMRs, what types of knowledge and opinions do residents currently possess about nuclear. So we really saw that as a good opportunity and example for other states. And then we wrap up the local engagement section by also talking about how Kentucky's recent legislation on nuclear-ready communities allows communities to self-select as ready to host new projects based on a few criteria. So all of these items can be explored through a framework as potential local engagement models. Next slide. And so this shows the strategic framework development pathway. Obviously, this can look very different state to state, and you may choose to move some of the items around or begin in a different order. But based on existing frameworks, both On nuclear and other energy technologies, we've pulled together a recommended pathway for state energy offices and PUCs as they explore pertinent questions, identify technical assistance opportunities, and facilitate stakeholder outreach. So we see the first step as establishing a requirement or scope of the framework. This could be something that the Energy Office or PUC comes up with internally or with the coalition, but there also may be a mandate through legislation or an executive order that emphasizes what the scope of the framework should be. Next, convening a team or working group. Third, developing a vision for the framework and collecting and analyzing data and information. And this could be done in coordination with some of the technical assistance partners we referenced earlier, garnering public input and feedback, recommended action and goals to meet the vision, drafting the framework, finalizing, adopting, and implementing the framework, conducting outreach and education. And this, similar to garnering public input and feedback, we see as an ongoing process. And then finally, monitoring progress and making updates to the framework as needed. Thanks. With that, I will turn it over to Catherine.
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, so as part of the process of working with the Advanced Nuclear State Collaborative on this framework, we invited our members to participate in providing some perspectives and inputs about what would be useful suggested categories for states to explore when they're thinking about developing an advanced nuclear energy framework. And so that input took the form of 2 workshops that were hosted in February of 2024 by New York and NASIO. Each hosted their own workshop. And people were invited to have a high-level discussion about sort of what was involved, what types of items should be considered and things like that. And the culmination of this process was we collected a lot of input, and then we identified these sort of 11, they ended up being 11 categories, which are sort of suggested areas for additional exploration. So the categories identified in this report, and of course, these are suggestions, so you might not, some of these might not be relevant, or you might identify additional categories that are important for your state when you're approaching a framework. But the categories identified were clean energy goals, cost and funding, economic development and community impact, federal policy and regulatory environment, industry coordination and business models, resource adequacy, siting and permitting, spent fuel safety and risk mitigation, state policy and regulatory environments, supply chain and workforce development considerations, and technological applicability for state use cases. So within each of these categories, within the larger report, we try to identify information on these categories that might be useful as you're approaching a framework. So the report highlights key questions to address. It looks at potentially useful resources for considering each of these categories. So this might be reports or things of that nature, state or federal examples of actions taken related to these categories, common challenges and opportunities, and then also where relevant, sort of, are there data gaps where additional information could provide value to planning processes. So in the interest of time, we're going to highlight 3 of these categories. And again, if this is interesting, feel free to reference our full report and you can find more information there. So our first spotlight category is going to be cost and funding. And on this issue, we highlighted some key questions. Are available funds for supporting early advanced nuclear power deployment perceived as accessible to developers and utilities? What type of financing models are available that might help to reduce first mover risk? And how do states interact in this process to support financing if appropriate? And then also, what are the decision points related to state level approval of nuclear power construction costs? And are there policy opportunities that exist within these sort of decision spots to support advanced nuclear? Some examples that we highlighted are Virginia's Virginia Power Innovation Fund. And this is a fund that is available for the purpose of research and design and innovation related to energy technologies. And so this is a broad pot of money that's available and includes funding for issues like nuclear. Also, Duke Energy Carolinas 2024 Carbon Plan, which is also a combined integrated resource plan. We like to highlight that as part of that process, they identified a goal of developing 600 megawatts of advanced nuclear. And through the IRP process, the commission authorized Duke to incur some costs related to initial siting and site development activities. So that's one funding model that people have reported is promising. Finally, there are opportunities and challenges associated with all of these things. Some of the opportunities relate to opportunities around knowledge sharing through partnerships with different first movers. So where information is shared about best practices or lessons learned, there might be potential to reduce costs on second and third builds. Challenges can relate to cost overruns and the impact that these overruns can have on ratepayers. Also, another challenge is just project delays can create some risk, especially if incentives are tied to strict timelines. If projects are extended, they might not meet the incentives timelines. So our next category is economic development and community impact. So some of the questions that we identified of interest are: how will different advanced nuclear reactor technologies impact state economic development and workforce considerations? So one element of this is just different nuclear reactor technologies have different workforce needs. And so how does that impact planning? What relationship do state economic development agencies currently have with state energy offices and PUCs, and how do they work together? And then what types of information do state energy offices and public utility commissions have available to share with communities who are interested in nuclear? So how are we sharing some of those messages? Some examples that we identified on economic development and community impacts. We have Texas's Advanced Nuclear Reactor Working Group, which released its final report in late 2024. This working group was established in August of 2023 at the direction of the Texas governor. And the working group was tasked with evaluating how advanced nuclear reactors can provide safe, reliable, and affordable power for Texas, and consider how to make the state a national leader in the deployment of nuclear power. And they split into several areas and explored topics such as potential financial incentives, state and federal regulatory impediments to growth, electric market impacts, technical challenges, and other factors. And they did a really great job around coalition building in the way that the working group was established to include input from a variety of different stakeholders within the state. The other thing that we highlighted here, and Kelsey alluded to it earlier, is Kentucky passed their Nuclear Ready Communities designation a couple of years ago, or last year. And this is a law that requires the Kentucky Nuclear Energy Development Authority to develop criteria for nuclear ready community designations. And so really that's focused on helping communities learn more about nuclear and making that determination within the community about whether they're interested in sort of broadcasting to potential nuclear developers that they're welcoming community and interested in learning more. So that's a great opportunity for some matching between developers in areas that are interested in this technology. So some opportunities around nuclear in the economic development space. If you've looked at polling recently, public support for nuclear energy is at a record high right now, and it's growing. So a lot of interest in advanced nuclear technologies. Nuclear power plants have when they are built, they can significantly contribute to local employment and tax revenue. So communities really do see benefits there. And then there are challenges such as sort of how do you match developers with interest in communities that could be host communities. And then for issues such as coal to nuclear transitions, what does local workforce look like? How do you retain and retrain those groups? And how do you make sure that the timing makes sense? And then our final spotlight category is spent fuel safety and risk mitigation, sort of a broad area that we bundled together. But really just looking at sort of public perception of safety and risk and how spent fuel plays into that. Some of the key questions that we identified in the report are: how can states best interact with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission? What do agreement state programs look like, state liaison officer programs, and things like that? Are there opportunities to participate in DOE's collaboration-based siting process, which is currently underway. And so some examples that we found that were sort of areas where states had done a great job at connecting on spent fuel and safety and working together are the Connecticut Nuclear Energy Advisory Council, which was established by the Connecticut General Assembly and is tasked with holding regular public meetings to discuss issues related to safety and operations, works with federal, state, and local agencies and nuclear plant operators to ensure public health and safety, and discuss proposed changes in or problems arising from the operation of the plant. So the other area, example of interest was DOE has a spent nuclear fuel package performance demonstration program that's currently underway, and they're working on making plans to conduct physical demonstrations on rail-sized spent nuclear fuel transportation casks. And these sort of efforts have occurred in other places over time, but really the goal is to share more information with the public about nuclear safety with fuel transportation and spent fuel transportation, and to just provide these examples so that the public has a better sense of what's happening and sort of the safety measures involved. Some of the opportunities that we highlighted in this area are there's been a lot of progress on long-term waste siting in other countries. So there's an opportunity there for the US to have some lessons learned or see what's worked in other countries and see if it makes sense to take some of those lessons ourselves. US DOE laboratories have done a lot of valuable research on some of these materials issues related to storage for long-term storage. So really a great resource there. And then there's been more interest lately in fuel reprocessing, which if the United States decides to take this approach, presents the opportunity to reduce the volume of nuclear spent fuel that would require long-term storage in the US. And then some of the challenges are sort of the previous efforts to establish a permanent nuclear spent fuel repository have not been successful. We have the Yucca Mountain project, which is stalled, and we have not yet identified an alternative facility for the US's nuclear waste storage. And then also public perception of nuclear fuel has been colored by portrayals in media and existing legacy sites. So you can think of sort of the Homer Simpson effect around what does nuclear waste look like and how is it stored safely. And so these are some of the items there. So we just touched on some of the categories. The next section of the paper really looks at how do we incorporate advanced nuclear energy into existing plans. So we identified several areas where it can really make sense to make sure states are thinking about how does advanced nuclear planning exist in other areas. So we highlighted three specific things: load growth forecasts, state energy plans, and integrated resource plans, all as areas where states are already engaging in these planning processes with other collaborators within the state. And it makes sense to see if there is a place for engagement and planning for advanced nuclear as well. So on load growth forecasts, coordination between the development of a strategic framework and a load growth forecast can be helpful to determine how much of a need a state will have for new energy generation in upcoming years. Recent year electrification efforts, advanced manufacturing, reshoring, and rapid growth in data centers and AI tools have all led to soaring forecasts related to demand in recent years in many states. And then the report identifies a couple of case studies where we've seen advanced nuclear planning come into play around load growth forecasts. And so Amazon and Microsoft both provide illustrative examples here. In March of 2024, Amazon paid $650 million to build a data center adjacent to the Susquehanna Steam Electric Station. And there was a data center that was planning to have an interconnection agreement. As you all know, there has been some engagement on this issue at FERC and a lot of discussion related to the impacts of moving forward on this decision, but certainly an area for discussion. The other recent announcement is Microsoft signed an $800 million power purchase agreement And they are off-taking energy from Crane Clean Energy Center, formerly known as 3 Mile Island, and Unit 1 at that site. This is a long-term power purchase agreement that's looking at a 20-year period beginning in 2028. And this is all contingent on the plant's owner, Constellation Energy, successfully restarting the unit in time. And Kira can share a little bit more about Constellation and Crane Clean Energy Center at the end of this report. I'm going to talk a little bit about integrated resource plans as well on this page, and then I'll pass things over to Kelsey. So an integrated resource plan, or an IRP, is just a state planning document that provides another opportunity to align state planning goals for advanced nuclear. An IRP sets out a utility's long-term expectations on how they will procure sufficient generation to meet future demand, while also satisfying state policies around decarbonization, the use of in-state resources, economic development, and other factors. Public utility commissions have oversight of IRP filings, and in about 3/4 of the US. And then finally, these IRPs, again, provide a great opportunity to communicate early interest in advanced reactors to state regulators. So it's just another place where we can have this conversation around nuclear and consider different energy portfolio scenarios. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Kelsey to talk a little bit more about state energy planning and take over the next couple slides.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so especially relevant to the state energy offices, state energy plans and the overall planning process helps to guide and build consensus among stakeholders within a state. They usually provide an assessment of current and future energy supply and demand. They examine existing energy policies and identify emerging challenges and opportunities around different energy technologies. And we see state energy plans as a really valuable opportunity to dive deeper into the topic of new nuclear generation. And we do look at 2 examples in the report. One is Virginia's 2022 State Energy Plan that looks at the potential for developing a commercial SMR in the state. And then similar to Utah's Strategic Framework Pathway report I referenced earlier, we talk a little bit about Operation Gigawatt in Utah, which is a key part of the state energy planning process and was launched by the State Energy Office in collaboration with the Governor's Office as a way to bridge the gap between energy supply and demand. And some of the key efforts within Operation Gigawatt center on nuclear and aligning state policies with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, as well as building a state nuclear program. So we just wanted to emphasize the value of incorporating advanced nuclear energy into these existing state plans and provide some case studies. With that, I think we can move to the next slide. So just to wrap up on some of the main conclusions and takeaways we include in the report, as state energy offices and commissions are exploring opportunities to develop advanced nuclear energy strategic frameworks, we really hope that this guidance document can serve as a starting point and a helpful tool on some of the key considerations and lessons learned and models from other states. Once the framework is developed, as we referenced earlier, in the pathway slide, states will likely monitor progress for any suggested recommendations or next steps or modifications. We see this as especially important when new data becomes available or new legislation or regulatory changes arise. We also emphasize that advanced nuclear energy will be an important tool to support decarbonization, economic development, and reliability for states. And we see these framework documents as a really great pathway to better understand how advanced nuclear can support these different goals. And then we close out the report with some additional resources and technical documents to support states. And so I'll pass it over to Kira to wrap that up.
Thanks, Kelsey. So we do list a number of resources available that can help states in developing these strategic frameworks. The Gateway to Accelerated Innovations in Nuclear, GAIN initiative, is a partnership of multiple national laboratories that has opportunities available to meet with states, conduct workshops, and provide resources. The Frontiers Initiative is through Idaho National Laboratory. They assisted on the Louisiana framework that we discussed, and on a few other states. Of course, the Office of Nuclear Energy within DOE has technical assistance available for states. They also have been very active in releasing a number of funding opportunities, one of which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation. And then Oak Ridge has a siting analysis for power generation expansion tool, OR Sage, and there's also a tool called Stand. We did a webinar through the ANSC on both of these tools a little while ago, so you can find that recording and resources on our websites, but those can also be available to help states think through questions around siting and some of the socioeconomic factors that many of the advanced nuclear strategic frameworks are exploring. Next slide. And before we get to questions, would encourage folks to submit questions in Q&A, but I did want to talk about some of the other resources that we have available through the ANSC. We have reports on coal to nuclear repowering, considerations for state energy offices and public utility commissions. We have a recent report on energy and industrial use cases for advanced nuclear reactors. So thinking through beyond electricity, what are the applications of advanced nuclear and how can those be consistent with state energy policy goals? We have nuclear energy as a keystone clean energy resource, just talking more about the role of the existing fleet in clean energy and grid reliability. And then we also have a paper looking at how investor-owned utilities are looking at nuclear generation in long-term utility resource planning, both existing nuclear and new advanced nuclear. We send out a newsletter to our members every other month. We just sent one out a couple of weeks ago for the 1st of July. And we keep a state action tracker updated. We do have a way for users to submit updates to us. So if something is happening in your state and you want to make sure we hear about it, please do let us know. That is available on our website as well. Next slide. So I think with that, we can start to answer some questions. I know I've seen a few questions from someone on cost and funding and involvement of municipal utilities. I think those are good questions. Actually, the next resource that we are planning on working on through the Advanced Nuclear State Collaborative is going to go more into detail on funding and financing strategies for advanced nuclear generation projects. So looking at some of the partnerships that have emerged of potential customers and owners of new nuclear generation, and looking at considerations for state energy offices and public utility commissions in terms of managing risk to ratepayers and consistency with state energy policy goals. So I don't have a lot of specific answers to offer on those questions, but that is something that we're going to be actively looking at in the near future. Looks like we do have another question on in strategic frameworks, does more wind and solar deployment strain grids because of the intermittency? Do we need more baseload, and how are states modifying their greenhouse gas goals to provide incentives for higher reliability? I don't know that I can particularly comment on that. Some of that is kind of outside the purview of this report, and in some cases outside the purview of state regulators. It is typically legislatures that set greenhouse gas targets, so it would generally be up to the legislature, depending on the state, but I think generally up to the legislature to modify those targets or to include carve-outs for reliability. So I would just sort of include that in that answer, Kelsey and Catherine. I don't know if you have anything to add there. I think we do have some folks that are also raising hands, so we can try and unmute you so that you can ask your questions. Can you expand on the siting step, e.g. environmental, water availability, and transmission?
Maybe I'll jump in, Kira. We don't get too much into the siting specifics within the framework document since this is more an examination of policy and regulatory considerations prior to deployment. But we did release a report in April 2024 on coal to nuclear repowering, and we do walk through in a little bit more detail in that report some of the key siting considerations and steps. So happy to put that report in the chat. And I see a question around Yucca Mountain, and we do talk a little bit about DOE's collaborative-based siting initiative in the framework document. Encourage folks to check that out. There are a few different coalitions that are part of that effort, looking at exploring potential for interim storage locations around the country. But Kira, Catherine, if there's anything else on the waste piece you want to touch on.
Sure. I mean, I just shout out, I think Katrina McMurray, the executive director of the Nuclear Waste Strategy Coalition, might be on with us. We were participating in one of their periodic calls earlier today. But I think that's a great resource, and they can provide information about the status of federal efforts around nuclear waste. So I'd refer folks to them as well. I'll try and put a link into the chat. I did also, in response to a question about industrial applications of advanced SMRs, the report that Catherine authored last year on energy and industrial use cases for advanced reactors would certainly be relevant for that. That talks through some of the applications for advanced reactors in terms of some defense applications, mining, remote offsite power uses. Certainly the X-energy project that's under development with Dow Chemical in Seadrift, Texas, is a good example of industrial applications. So the high temperature heat from advanced reactors is a particularly attractive component, and certainly that could be part of a cogeneration project, or reactor could potentially provide both heat and electricity. So again, that's something that would be looking at in our upcoming work on funding and financing.
And I'll just mention, there's the Seadrift's power plant project that is happening in Texas, which is one great example. If you're interested in this, it's a Dow Chemical X-energy project to install SMRs on site for this high temperature chemical heat processes. So if you're interested, yeah, I would recommend you take a look at the report that we produced, and you can also learn more about the Dow Chemical X-energy Seadrift's.
We have a question here on, do you have a sense of which areas or states will require the most assistance with regard to building out a framework for advanced nuclear? I'd just say in response to this question that, we're seeing interest in advanced nuclear from states that have not had large nuclear generation before. Much of the West has not had nuclear generation. So I think it is important for those states to really look at the benefits of developing a strategic framework and kind of thinking through the challenges and risks to nuclear development, particularly if there has never been a project developed in that state. So I think looking at Utah might be a good example. Hopefully this document that we've developed will kind of help states not to be starting from zero, and they can build on the work that's been done in other states and take advantage of the resources that are available from DOE, from the national labs, and from other stakeholders.
And I just wanted to add on to this, in case it's relevant. A lot of states are examining sort of their capacity right now to prepare for advanced nuclear. And so that could look like a lot of things. That could be making sure they have the engineers with the experience on the POCs to consider rate cases or other applications, or many things. Our Advanced Nuclear State Action Tracker that the ANSC has developed and is on the NERC website does a pretty good job of tracking some of these capacity development activities that states have engaged in. So if you're curious to know more about what types of activities states are engaging in, or how they're thinking about this, that's a great resource to learn more about what's going on, to sort of make sure that they have the resources they need.
Yeah, and maybe just specifically on the actual framework development itself, within the report, in the categories that Catherine walked through, we have a data gaps section, which highlights specific information states may need assistance with getting, thinking about things like advanced nuclear energy reliability attributes during extreme weather events and natural disasters, or data gaps around existing and retired power plant sites and opportunities for siting new nuclear. So we do walk through in the report a few areas where states may benefit from additional information or data.
All right, seeing a few other questions come in, we'll try to get to as many as we can before the top of the hour. Do you see states looking to be the regulator as opposed to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission for approving and licensing advanced reactors? I would say probably not to this answer. I think the NRC will continue its role as primarily the safety regulator for advanced reactors. I think where states come in is really more on the permitting and cost side. Public utility commissions would be involved if a regulated utility were pursuing an advanced nuclear project. So the PUC would have authority to approve cost recovery mechanisms. And I think for state energy offices, maybe Kelsey can speak to this a little bit more, but going back to the link that we recommended between nuclear strategic frameworks and state energy plans, I think state energy offices can still be engaged in these projects and can also offer some funding assistance for certain components of nuclear project development. But no, certainly still envision a very strong role for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. For the question on sharing slides, yes, we will be sending slides out, so you can look for an email from us shortly. We got a question on the Finnish consent-based model for siting a long-term spent fuel repository, focused on siting it on the property of a nuclear power plant, limiting it only to the waste produced by one particular plant, and making the placement permanent due to reprocessing being outlawed. Can you expand on how you see the Finnish case as an example for states in the US?
That's not necessarily something we get too into in this framework, but we do try to emphasize success stories and lessons learned domestically more often, but we do have opportunities for the states to learn from international partners as well. So always happy to share the Finnish success story with state energy offices and public utility commissions when the opportunity arises. But it's not something we explored in this report.
All right, and we have a question on how the report addresses the big human capital and labor development challenge, engineering programs, craft trade training, where in the reports are these state university programs summarized. So we do have a section on workforce development needs. That certainly is a major component of nuclear projects, and the availability of a skilled workforce, both for construction and for operating the plant, is critical. Catherine, I don't know if you want to speak to anything else in that piece of the report.
Thanks, Kira. Yeah, so I'd say that this report does a good job, especially pulling together some different resources from organizations and the government reports related to supply chain and workforce development. So if this is an area of interest, our framework report definitely provides a springboard for you to learn more about what's been written in this area.
Yeah, and I'll just add, again, with our Coal to Nuclear repowering report, we have a pretty in-depth section on workforce transition opportunities and economic development. And within that report, we have some examples from the Kentucky Nuclear Development Work Group around university, community college, and K through 12 institutions and how they can best coordinate with utilities and participate in public meetings and participate in the integrated resource planning process to better understand timelines and workforce needs associated with SMR projects. So okay, well, I just recommend that report as another opportunity to explore some of the state workforce programs that are underway.
Yeah, I think Tennessee is also a great example. One of our ANSC co-chairs is Molly Cripps, the director of the Tennessee Energy Office, and I know she was one of our members that provided some comments on this report, but particularly in the Knoxville area with Oak Ridge National Lab, University of Tennessee, and the Clinch River site, and the TVA being there as well. I think they've been taking kind of an active approach to expanding training and workforce development opportunities. And yes, we will capture all of the links that we've been throwing into chat in our wrap-up email along with the slides. So we have a couple more minutes, so I just wanted to go through a few final slides before we hit 2 o'clock Eastern. So one was just sharing that we, a couple of NAVERC and NASIO staff recently had the opportunity to accompany staff from the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection to Crane Clean Energy Center and learn more about the restart process of that unit. We got to see the control room, went by the training center, saw the generator. So that was really excellent tour. Thanks very much to the Pennsylvania Commission staff for inviting us along. Really interesting to learn about where they are in the process and how Constellation is working with companies like Holtec on Palisades and then NextEra on the Duane Arnold's plant in Iowa for other possible restarts. And next slide. Lastly, we just wanted to mention a announcement for everyone's awareness. There is a new DOE pilot program to build advanced U.S. nuclear fuel lines. An RFA was released, I think, earlier this week with applications due in mid-August. So we can include a link to that as well. But if you're interested in that opportunity, please do refer to the FedConnect page for more information. We do have a question on if we will offer any continuing education certificate. No, we do not currently do that, but if that's something that folks would be interested in, I encourage you to reach out to us. I know at some of NAVERC's and NASIO's in-person conferences, there are certifications available for continuing education. So that might be an option, but currently, no, we do not do that for these webinars. NAVERC does have a robust professional development program. Again, we can include a link to that in our follow-up email. So there are lots of training opportunities, and we can look at what's available on the NASIO side as well. So with that, I think I can just thank my co-authors and co-panelists today, Kelsey and Catherine. Thanks to Commissioner Marquez Peterson. She called in from the airport today, so appreciate her participating in this while she is on the road. And thank you all for joining us. Hope you will check out the full reports and wishing everyone a nice weekend. Thanks all.